Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. We just were up in Vancouver, BC for the International Cannabis Business Conference, or ICBC, where they had some really good panels, including vetting cannabis investment for international feasibility. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
I've seen the entire cannabis industry emerge from the first commercial sales in Colorado, which we kind of helped to start with medical, and then the first adult use market, scaled and worked in 34 states, worked in 16 countries already, so we have a pretty good idea of what's going on in the world, and specifically, we're not guessing when it comes to some of these countries and policies that we're gonna go over. But I'm a farm kid from Wisconsin, really deep focus on agriculture, which is what we started in, but now, having worked in all sectors of the industry, a lot of the truths that we'll share about Canada are very, very similar to other markets. But the thing you have to remember is that US cannabis and Canadian cannabis, it doesn't translate to international cannabis. And you can't just think you're gonna launch some gummy bear brand here and then be selling in Germany next year, which is pretty important. So when we think about the world and what happened from California Compassionate Care Act in 1996, how that's scaled and what's happened, it's pretty fucking incredible to think that we actually have a bona fide industry today that's not only disrupting, but interrupting normal business processes. And as you're looking at the rest of the world, a lot of like that black area still, it's only a matter of time. And it's not gonna be Finland producing for Finland. It's not gonna be this continual rollout model. Where can you produce lower cost at the same standards to achieve like a global domination? And that's what the big players that haven't gotten into this space yet are really looking at as this scales. So today we're gonna cover some on the global side, some on the US side, and some on the Canada side, and really think of how it all comes together. And the key difference here, like I have a consulting company, we have venture capital companies, now do private equity international. The really similarity here in everything is capital. Without it, you're screwed. And how to actually get institutional capital or private investors is challenging. Everyone went public here in Canada, good for a few, hasn't worked out for a lot of them, and based on a few of the things that we'll talk about, it's not gonna work for many of them. So private capital, as you're scaling, is so critical to focus on. A big thing about international, like I said, it's not the same as the US or Canada. And Canada and Uruguay, very ballsy in legalizing a narcotic for adult use purposes. And God bless Canada for having the first mover advantage in this. But Health Canada had no idea how to go from medical to recreational. And it's been one of the biggest catastrophes, I'd say, in our industry since the inception. Like bigger than vape things, bigger than like children getting products or wrongful deaths. So when you're going international, you have to know the rules to play this game. And international policy, when it comes to the single convention, how the UN's looking at this, how the WHO is looking at this. If you don't know those rules and you're planning global partnerships, it's not just about some country in Zimbabwe or Swaziland or Uganda or some Georgia rackeplay that's gonna be a big deal. They have to be compliant with these drug policies, because if not, they just won't happen. GMP is a big thing, everyone talks about it, thinks it's so easy. And Health Canada, there were 5, maybe 6 companies that are now getting GMP compliance, but it's not just about doing GMP to sell to Europe. You're trying to make sure that you don't have risks and liabilities as your business scales. And GMP is just one of these. The really important one, if you're in cultivation, GACP. Everyone thinks GAP is so important, but it's actually GACP, Good Agricultural Collection Practices, that most of these businesses are founded on. But if you're doing anything international, GAP, GACP, GMP, GDP, and GLP for laboratories, critical, because that's the big challenge here that you're gonna see in Canada. When we think about the US quick, which many Canadian companies are coming down to launch into Canada because they're highly capitalized from their public markets, you think in the United States, there are 47 of 50 states that have some sort of medical cannabis law. We've got 11 states that have adult use, 31 that have some sort of commercial sales for medical. That's over half, and like the previous gentleman said, like once there's 25 rec states, it's only a matter of time, but you have to know in the United States, medical legalization will happen first. And just because everyone thinks Trump's gonna legalize it to try to get reelected, even if he tried, there are many steps and policies that would have to happen before that would happen. So focus on medical legalization in the US first, followed by an adult use. And it's not a question of if this is going to happen, it's when. But in the United States, with Colorado right where we were and started, to now think of all of those blue states that adult use is happening. And yeah, Michigan is slow, Illinois is about to happen, Maine and Massachusetts kind of messed up programs initially, but over 92% of all of the revenue in the United States reported today is from the adult use side. And I'm a disabled vet, that's how I got into the cannabis industry, and we have to remember the medical side from taxes and quality, but here even in Canada, the medical industry, who's talking about it? Who cares about it anymore? And the medical is the foot into the door into the adult use market. We've seen it in the United States 100% of the time. If you were medical licensed, you have some sort of first preference to get to adult use. Sound similar to Canada? So big opportunities in the United States now. It's not a closed market, but it's state by state. And until interstate commerce is allowed from federal legalization, I can't produce in Oregon and then ship it to another state. So you have to have new companies in each state, new business partners. Sometimes there's residency requirements. You look at Arkansas, 5 cultivation processing licenses for 3 million people. If that was Colorado equivalent, you'd have 10 growers for Colorado. You can get into it, you have to get into it first. But the big ones right now in the United States, Illinois, when you think about that map, first adult use in the Midwest. And Michigan was a very, we call it like one of the dirty 7 states. It had a medical program, you could have the cards on the wall and like not sell it. But then of course, like $4 billion of cannabis were flooding out of Michigan every year to the East Coast. Same thing in Maine. So you think Illinois adult use is going to be huge. Major Canadian companies are applying there. It's going to be very, very challenging, but 12 million people, adult use social consumption lounges near the borders, it's going to be phenomenal. And you also have to think about the neighboring countries or states. Like here in Canada, you've got 90% of your population within 10 miles of the US border, and then 90% of all Canadians live in 3 territories that have shitty laws. And you're like Quebec, Montreal, Ontario, and great British Columbia. You've missed out on $5-6 billion in revenue just from not doing it correctly. So when you're thinking about these new states as they're coming up, California, for example, nearly 70% of all municipalities have no cannabis laws yet. Some allow medical production, some allow maybe just medical sales. The same thing is going to happen here in Canada. So you have to target the municipalities, get those licenses, and be compliant with the municipalities, being compliant with Health Canada laws. But the United States is not over. It's just begun, and it's not just these few big MSO multi-state operators that are going to take the whole pie. Like getting into a new state is vital in the beginning. It's so much, think Florida. You want to buy part of a license for $86 million today? That license we helped to get like 4 years ago, they spent less than $1 million to get it. So just these pieces of paper have major value. But the United States, you'll notice a lot of Canadian focus coming down, trying to get in and capitalize, but there's one problem here. Investing into something that's federally illegal as a foreign national, not the best idea, especially when you have boards of directors and optics and image. I have no problem breaking federal law in the United States, as long as I'm following state or territory law. Canada, by legalizing recreational cannabis, violated international law. Same with Uruguay, and this could cause some major challenges, which we'll get into. So let's get into Canada here. Kind of been a fun market to watch. I really appreciated your medical market initially and what that did, but then with the public infusion of capital, 2014, 2015, it caused, let's just call it chaos in Canada and the rest of the world. Where I remember speaking in San Francisco for ICBC about a year ago, if you put $1 million into the top Canadian public LPs, you'd have $4.1 million today. And Aurora's stock down 4 or 5%. With the news coming out today, it'll probably be 7-8% by the end of the day. They all got huge, but none of them remembered that you have to make revenue eventually, and you have to meet these projections. And yes, taking over the world as a giant public company sounds great, but everyone wants you every single day. And as you're trying to do this, how you're redeploying capital and buying other companies, if you're a Canadian public company and in the United States, I mean, Lori Ajax was here earlier today, I mean, there's some major potential implications of being a foreign national company and investing into something federally illegal. The United States, we love to protect our businesses and our IP, What would happen then as we get closer to federal legalization, we want to kick out some of these companies? You have to have some divesting strategies as well if you're going to get into the United States and how you're going to structure those companies. Some major things with the cultivation area, which is expanded, that's an actual photo on the left there of cannabis that was purchased recently here in Canada. Quality is something that people don't understand once you're an LP. If you've bought rec cannabis here, it's pretty pathetic. It's like Colorado in like 2010. And there are some good companies that are doing this, but the packaging and the quality, and everyone keeps talking about all of these shortages, which we're going to get into, but they don't realize that quality is something that's paramount. And when you think internationally, quality is a different term. It's not like this is dank bud, bro. That's consumer quality. But the GMP, the quality standards by Canada, you have to hit that. But you have to also remember consumer quality. It's the same problem that Bedrocan has. Like, world leader in cannabis exports, 19 countries, 6 varieties that are shipped into Germany, and based on the price and the quality, most people don't like it. But it's some of the most standard deviation, like the lowest in the world, like for consistent supply, but it's garbage and no one likes to smoke it. Or the dry, kind of horrible cannabis here, you have to start going towards quality and not selling popcorn nugs. It's not how you launch a quality brand. And when we think about brands, it's very, very hard to brand like a Johnny Apple, but when you're an applesauce company or Heinz ketchup, that's different than growing the dankest heirloom tomatoes. And as a farmer, I love the quality side, but the consumer packaged goods and brands, 5-6 years ago, we just made fun of them because nothing was quality, and they kept growing more and more. But quality is going to be the key differentiator in these markets as they expand. This is pretty hilarious here. In Canada, there's almost 700 pending LPs right now because your licensing process kind of sucked. You got your first license, had to build out your whole expensive facility, have your inspections, and then have a license. With almost 700 in the queue and this much supply that's just sitting around, Canada's not the best place to grow cannabis, even with greenhouses, even in an old Hershey's chocolate factory. Your cost of production are high, your taxes are horrible, and it's very, very hard to structure correctly in Canada. So when you're thinking about the average cost of production and what's the prices are happening at, building more and more cultivation centers in Canada is not the option. And if you're a craft grower, which God bless you and I love that side, if you don't have distribution to get into the sales channels, you don't have a shot. We've seen the same thing in the United States. And in Colorado, we started to put indoor out of business with big greenhouses back 2009, 10, and 11. Greenhouse is a very good thing, but then Aurora, with their massive facility, it's 110 million Canadian to build that thing. We could have built that with like Turkish companies and Dutch companies for about 25. So this is not the place where international exports are going to happen, even though you were the first to be able to do it. But there is plenty of cannabis here. And then allowing outdoor production for oils as you're getting into your extracted products in the future, that's going to be a key part that's going to put a lot of these indoor facilities out of business. When you're thinking about wholesale price, like Benchmarks does a great job in the United States. This is the average then for all tracked sales in Canada at this point. When you're thinking about Bedrocan, like I mentioned, they can only sell for 2.5 euros a gram to the Office of Medical Cannabis, like in the Netherlands. They then sell that, to the bee farm to an importer to a distributor to a pharmacy. That's why in Germany, you'll see cannabis from 18 to 25 euros a gram that the grower only got 2.5 a gram for, that they're growing it for maybe at 125 to 140 a gram. If your margin's that, you're nothing. That big sale that they did to London, the first one of like 400 grams, they made less than 1,000 euros from doing that sale. And the same thing's gonna happen to Canadian companies. So all the people building these facilities out thinking just because you got first mover advantage to ship to the world, it's all about price. If you meet the quality standard and you're the lowest price, you get the generic contract for the country. And it's not gonna be the Canadians for much, much longer. This is huge for what's gonna happen to you. Flour and a few types of topicals and basic oils was not the way to launch cannabis in Canada. In 2007, in December, was the first time for all track sales in the United States we saw that it wasn't flour anymore. And I love a good joint, but when you can just hit a vape pen or like eat an edible, It's very, very different and gets a lot more consumers. So this is gonna explode in Canada. With all the vaping issues that have happened in the United States, it's not the cannabis that's dangerous here. We have no regulations for this. And then you're seeing the same thing with tobacco. So the companies that launch that aren't using vitamin E or polypropyl glycol as their solvents or their viscous agents, not reintroducing terpenes or fake flavors, those companies are gonna scale and do phenomenal here. And it's gonna change the face of the Canadian cannabis industry. Now, in October, when those start to come out in sales, like December through February, and these brands launch, it's gonna change because your flower quality has been crap, your packaging has been pretty crappy. There's not been many stores. When you think in Montreal for a while, like one store for that whole place, or here in BC, like there's so few, same thing in Ontario. As new products come out and consumer packaged goods, brands with distribution will change this landscape. And I easily foresee that probably 60-70% of your market within a year and a half to 2 years will be infused extracted products. But your packaging, has a couple issues to be seen here. So some major opportunities for Canada, even though I'm saying some of the challenges for it. There's gonna be more and more consolidations. You're gonna see major ancillary plays for like ancillary products and ancillary services. Since this is the first legalized real country, no offense Uruguay, and like our point of sale systems, our packaging companies, our distribution companies are gonna mirror, and a lot of Canadian companies will come down and take that market share. So if you're in the ancillary side for cannabis, you're in a good place. It's also way less risky, you can do banking, it's not cannabis, and that's something that for the US has major, major value. It's not your quality of how good you grow weed. Like, I'm not saying they don't do that well in Canada, you of course do, but not making it to the stores. And you've got here British Columbia, the California of Canada, grows copious amounts of cannabis that's not taxed and regulated so highly. So as this starts to change and more testing is coming out and these big producers start making quality, that's where I see some key pivotal plays, but also your distribution. If you don't have distribution, which a lot of the big LPs and pubcos have tried to tie up, your products don't make it to market. Same thing in California. In California, if you're not paying for shelf space as a brand or have a really good distribution company, your craft cannabis or your products don't make the shelves. And then you'll see companies like Candescent, not giving a plug out here, 4 colors and a pretty logo, small cultivation center but with a distribution license that buys wholesale, repackages under their brands, pay for shelf space, and flood that product around the market. And the same thing is going to happen here in Canada. Just like many of the big LPs, they buy from other small producers, repackage it, and then get that to the stores. And as your brands start to establish, that's something most people haven't been able to consider. You've got Edison and Kova and a few. But as it gets larger, brands will dictate the future, and a lot of them will be regional and territorial based. Exports were huge for Canada because you used to just have Bedrocan in the Netherlands. 5 or 6 of those bigger producers starting to do their press releases about exports, but it's still not been that high because internationally, without doctor education, there are no patients. And without patients, there's no clients. And then no clients, there's no revenue, and then there's no business. That's been the problem with Aurora and Canopy and all, like Tilray, getting all these licenses all over the world, which we've got licenses in 13 countries right now. But a lot of them you have to hold it, and it's a longer term international play. And you're producing that for like medical pharmaceutical cannabis versus we're gonna have rec cannabis in Germany anytime soon. But the export side is what caused a lot of their value to go huge through the roof, but they were thinking the rest of the world was gonna be like the United States and Canada. International, we export flower and oil. Compounding happens in pharmacies. It's not vape pens, it's not suppositories. To get into that side, you're talking 7 to 11 years of preclinical, clinical, 3 phases of development. But that's like the international play that's really, really valuable that most people aren't seeing. It's not just about shipping dry flower around the world, but like our license in Portugal, we could produce for about 13 euro cents a gram. A tenth of what it costs in the Netherlands. And compared to Canada, I mean, maybe an eighth, or I'm sorry, like a 12th as much as Canada. And we're already in Europe. That's why when we talk about Colombia and some of these other countries, there's major opportunities, but you have to use what you did in Canada to scale to the world and not just entrench yourself thinking this is where you're gonna produce for the rest of all time. Your medical market cannot be forgotten about. Patients are how this market happened. And we have to always remember that from different taxes and the same quality and testing standards. But being able to ship cannabis in the mail, awesome, what you first started here. But it's being completely forgotten, and I see a major opportunity there long term for a few of the companies that get into it and are patient focused. But it's something that every single market, remember for the US, getting in from a medical standpoint first is how you get into the adult use market. And if you get into medical and just completely forget those roots, it is a total addressable market that you're just forgetting about. And then the brand licensing, the loyalties, it just doesn't happen. But everything we know about medical cannabis and recreational cannabis in the US and Canada is the same kind of thing. It's not true medical. This other thing's gonna happen called pharma. And they're very interested in the space, it's just way too risky for them right now. And we already passed this threshold called a safety profile. So that's the major value when you develop a new drug, getting past that point. So once you're getting international, you think about pharmaceutical. If you're doing clinical trials, if you're getting drug registrations, just like all the value of Israel, it's not about the production. It's about their old medical research that's going to be applicable to the rest of the world. And if you're starting to do that in Canada, it's a major foot in the door for this international expansion. You know, on your rec side, it's going to be big. It's not going to be as big as most people think because your taxes are too high. Your climate costs of production are too high. Your illicit market is going to be harder to fight in Canada than it is in the United States because it's been a very robust program, and originally medical producers could produce it all over the place, have their own plants, then they kind of stopped that. Once those plants are out there, this is a weed. They grow, and people continue to grow it. But for a supplemental income source, it's not as lucrative on a long-term basis, but it's going to be very challenging to fight. But if anyone's bought a pre-rolled joint in Canada, like these packages, like take it out of the big box, and it's like this big plastic thing. A lot of lessons could be learned from the United States cannabis companies and what we've done. So just think, what's working in the United States when it comes to packaging and marketing and how to actually market on a national basis, which you can do here. Still a lot of regulations around it. We couldn't do that in the United States. That's why it's been so slow. But adult use in Canada is going to go fast. And you had a really shitty first year. I mean, pretty pathetic for what it should have been, mostly based on the municipality and territorial laws, ramping up like the retail store licenses. And there's more illegal stores in BC than legal stores, and they're way cheaper. And you just walk in, like, you don't even have to show an ID, it's pretty incredible, but not advocating illicit sales. When you think about where production's happening and what the tax rates are there and how they give permits, this is very important for when it comes to cost of production. If you're trying to do this in Manitoba or certain places, there's a reason their prices are higher. Or a client of ours years ago, like Prince Edward Island, like their cost of production was ridiculous, but they were one of the only ones there. Now that this is getting nationalized on a larger basis, it's gonna get huge, but something you have to remember, governments are more addicted to tax revenue than heroin. And once they get a taste of it, they will fight for it more and more. That's why we were very scared about the LCBO originally. Like in Ontario, like cannabis stores just going to be done in like liquor stores. We were very scared about it. And long term, I do see the potentiality for this to happen. So getting retail licenses, no, there could be a shift, but getting them early is critical to get to revenue side.
And with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.